Welcome to a new episode of MP's Stories. Our story today will relate to the concept of conflict styles. We discussed that a few episodes ago, and we focused on compromise at that time. In this episode, I would like to talk about conflict avoidance. And of course, when we say conflict avoidance, this is very different from what we call conflict prevention. Conflict prevention is systemically a process to try to make sure that we predict a conflict before it becomes violent and to do something to prevent it from becoming violent. But conflict avoidance refers to the style of behavior in a conflict where you walk away from a conflict, whether you by choice or not. But the idea is that instead of even compromising or negotiating or even competing in a conflict, you walk away for whatever factor. And I think that the notion of avoidance of a conflict is sometimes looked upon as if it is not preferred because of many psychological factors and otherwise. However, I think that like all other conflict styles, it also has its right time. And there are moments when conflict avoidance may be the proper course of action. And to illustrate this, I'm going to share a story from my childhood, from the 1960s. I grew up in Cairo, in Egypt, and it was a pattern of many families in Egypt at that time that in the summertime you go spend a week or two by the beach in Alexandria. And my family had that same pattern, and every summer we all looked forward to go and spend a couple of weeks in Alexandria on the beach. I went, I think in 1966, my father, my mother, and my brothers, all of us went, as we always do. And I remember in that year, there were also friends of ours who came from our neighborhood in Cairo, and also people we know in Alexandria. So one day we were sitting at the beach, fairly large group, my father, my mother, and some of the adults of their age, and also other children playing with myself and my siblings. It's important to note here that my father himself was a judge. And of course, as a judge, he has a social status and position in the society that he has to always maintain wherever he goes. So we were playing at the beach, having a good time, and one of our family friends who came with us, they had a young servant, a boy who is working in their house to clean, and that is common in many families and communities in not only Egypt, but in many other countries. And usually that child is poor, simple child, comes from the village, and he's just helping in the house and cleaning and supporting the family and so on. And he was a little child, our age, maybe 10 years old, 9 years old. And you can imagine for him, a day at the beach was like heaven, something that finally he's not doing the kind of mundane work that he's doing every day. And here he's having good time and playing like everybody else at the beach. So he was around helping, playing and having good time like other children are. And ourselves also were doing the same. There was one other man with his family sitting close to us under his umbrella. And this man seemed to be in a very bad day, having a very bad day, in a bad mood. He picked a fight almost with every half hour. He was picking a fight with somebody at the beach, whether one of the vendors who was passing by to sell sweets for his children, or with another person sitting close to him. But it was really obvious that this person was having some problems and he was picking a fight every few minutes with somebody. It was very strange. However, it was not our business. We were enjoying our time. My parents are having fun with their friends and so on. Suddenly, this man, the man in a bad mood, comes towards our umbrella. And he comes dragging that servant boy who works for our family friends. And he's dragging him in a very angry way and almost violent way, and he just threw him almost in front of my father. And he confronted my father directly, and he said, "Is this boy with you?" And my father and others said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you better take care of him, otherwise I'm going to beat the heck out of him." And he even threw him even stronger towards my father. It was such a shocking moment, and my father just looked at that guy and assessed him for a couple of seconds. And then, to my surprise, what I found is that my father just looked at him, and then he just turned to his friends and started to talk to them as if this guy didn't exist whatsoever. So the guy stood there for a couple of seconds, and he realized that nobody is reciprocating his behavior Nobody is yelling back at him. Actually, he stood there and he felt like he has no meaning of standing because my father just turned to his friends and pretended as if he didn't exist. So the guy just walked away to his own umbrella and he left us alone. That story from more than 50 years ago stuck in my mind since then. And as I was studying and learning about peace and conflict and now teaching about different styles of conflict behavior and so on, I found that this was a perfect example of conflict avoidance. Here, my father chose to avoid the conflict. He could have done other things. He could have stood up to the guy. He could have yelled back at him. He could have done many other things. But instead, he decided just to make sure that our child, the servant, is well protected with us. And otherwise, he just ignored the guy completely, totally avoided getting into a conflict with him. Perhaps my father assessed that any kind of reaction towards that guy will result in escalation. And the escalation would be embarrassment to my father, being a judge, and to the families that are sitting with us, and to everybody. And nothing good will come out of arguing with such a person who seemed to be in a bad mood and picking a fight every few minutes. So therefore, the best course of action for my father was to avoid the conflict. Obviously, there are times when we got to avoid a conflict. And according to the chart that we see, we say that avoiding a conflict is most appropriate when the relationship is not that important, and also your stakes in the situation are also low. You don't have much to worry about in such a conflict. When both are low, maybe conflict avoidance is a good course of action. And I think that's pretty much what my father did at that time. And 50-something years after, I use it as an example to show people that yes, there are moments when conflict avoidance is the right course of action in a conflict situation. I hope you found this story useful, and until more stories, in peace. Amr.